On a spring night in Utah, a young woman got ready for what seemed like an ordinary first date. She'd matched with someone on Tinder, exchanged messages, and agreed to meet. Hours later, she was dead murdered by the man she'd just met, in an act he later admitted was premeditated. Her name was Ashlyn Black. She was 25 years old, and her killer had invited her over knowing exactly what he planned to do.
Killer back in 2009. Now, they were friendly, they never dated, but she says it wasn't until last year that he started bombarding her with text messages trying to meet up. She was trying to be nice and let him know that she wasn't interested. The most recent text was actually last week. She says she never felt that she was in danger or that he was aggressive, but that he was very persistent.
I did get a weird vibe, and I think that's kind of what stopped me from ever hanging out with him. I've known him for 11 years, and that could have been me.
This is a story about trust, about the hidden dangers that can lurk behind a swipe and a smile, and about a life stolen in the cruelest way imaginable. Before you go any further, I want to ask you something. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe in honouring victims and understanding the darkness that sometimes walks among us, please take a moment to subscribe. It costs you nothing, but it helps us continue sharing these stories with the respect and care they deserve. In the early morning hours of May 24th, 2020, police in Layton, Utah received a chilling call. The voice on the other end was calm, almost detached. The caller reported that he had killed someone, a woman he'd just met through a dating app.
I have a male on the line saying he wants to die and that he killed someone. He doesn't know who he has killed, but that it occurred at that address.
The suspect wants us to shoot him. Blood on the floor, looks unconscious, not moving.
When officers arrived at the home on North Reed Avenue, they found a scene that would haunt them. A young woman lay face down on the bedroom floor, multiple stab wounds covering her torso. Despite desperate efforts to save her, she was pronounced dead at the scene. The man who made the call was still there, waiting. His name was Ethan Hunsaker, and he had a confession ready. What happened that night wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't an argument that spiraled out of control. According to investigators, the date had been normal. There had been no fight, no dispute. Instead, this was something far more unsettling. A deliberate, calculated act of violence against a stranger who had simply agreed to go out for drinks. To understand the full weight of this tragedy, you need to know who Ashlyn Black was. She was described by those who loved her as an adventurous, tender, and loving free spirit. Ashlyn had a deep appreciation for the simple pleasures vintage clothing stores, where she could spend hours browsing, camping trips under open skies, and the raw, emotional music of Nirvana. One of her favourite lyrics was "Come as you are," a phrase that seemed to capture her philosophy on life: acceptance, openness, and kindness. Ashlyn worked caring for special needs children, dedicating her days to being a voice for those who struggled to speak for themselves. Her family would later say that this work came naturally to her. It was simply who she was. She volunteered at women's shelters and was a passionate advocate for the LGBTQ community. She believed in inclusion, in standing up for people who felt invisible or marginalised. Those who worked alongside her were devastated by her loss, remembering her not just as a colleague, but as someone who brought light into difficult spaces. But perhaps what defined Ashlyn most was her dream of becoming a mother. Her mother, Jamie Buckaloo, later shared that Ashlyn wanted to be a parent with all her heart. She had even made plans to adopt a child with Down syndrome someday, a decision clearly shaped by her years of working with children who needed extra care and compassion. Black's mother told the court that her daughter always had a way of finding humour in unusual circumstances, and she had a fierce love for her family. Ashlyn had an infectious laugh, the kind that made people feel instantly at ease, like they'd known her for years. She was 25 years old, living in Layton, Utah, navigating life and relationships like millions of other young people. And, like so many in her generation, she turned to dating apps to meet someone. On the evening of May 23rd, 2020, Ashlyn was scrolling through Tinder when she matched with someone new. His profile said his name was Ethan Hunsaker. He was 24, a father of one, recently separated from his wife. They started chatting, and the conversation flowed easily. Before long, they'd made plans to meet that very night. It seemed harmless, exciting even. Just a first date dinner and drinks at a local bar. There was no reason to think otherwise. Around 9 in the evening, Ethan Hunsaker drove to Ashlyn's home to pick her up. They headed to a bar in Layton, settling in for what appeared to be a pleasant evening. According to what Ethan would later tell police, the date went well. They talked, they laughed, they drank. There was no tension, no awkwardness, nothing that would suggest what was about to happen. They stayed at the bar for several hours before eventually leaving together and returning to Ethan's house. What happened next is almost impossible to comprehend.
With news of a 25-year-old stabbed to death while on a Tinder date. Here's where it happened. It happened at the suspect's home at 1319 North Reed Drive in Layton. Police say dispatch first got the call early. This was about 3:20 in the morning. And Nicole, this is a story that is hard to make sense of. What are you learning tonight?
After returning to Hunsaker's home, the two engaged in consensual activity and eventually fell asleep together. Ethan later told investigators that he woke up to find Ashlyn lying on his left arm as they cuddled or spooned. And then, without warning, without provocation, he made a decision. He began choking her as hard as he could. Ashlyn fought back desperately, trying to pull his arms away from her neck. The struggle left marks on Ethan's arms, neck, and shoulders. He continued choking her for about a minute, but that wasn't the end. Ethan got up and went into the kitchen. He retrieved a spring-assisted pocket knife with a 4-inch blade. Returning to the bedroom, he knelt over Ashlyn's half-conscious body and began stabbing her. He stabbed her between 5 and 10 times in the chest, the sides, the back. Then, by his own admission, he did something that reveals just how cold and calculated this act was. He waited. For approximately 10 minutes, he watched her bleed out before finally picking up the phone to call 911. When dispatchers answered, Hunsaker made suicidal statements and described the knife he had used. He told them he'd just killed someone he barely knew, someone he'd met on Tinder just hours earlier. He even said he didn't know her last name. When police arrived shortly after 3:20 in the morning, the scene was as horrific as they'd feared. Ashlyn lay lifeless on the bedroom floor. Ethan was still there, calm and eerily composed.
He actually worked with the alleged killer back in 2009. Now, they were friendly, they never dated, but she says it wasn't until last year that he started bombarding her with text messages trying to meet up. She was trying to be nice and let him know that she wasn't interested. The most recent text was actually last week. She says she never felt that she was in danger or that he was aggressive, but that he was very persistent.
I did get a weird vibe, and I think that's kind of what stopped me from ever hanging out with him.
From Instagram to Snapchat.
Overbearing, just can't take no for an answer.
Autumn Daly says his text messages were all the same.
In this last month, it's been like every other day, him asking me to make plans or do something.
She often didn't respond, and when she did, she politely declined the invitations, even one asking for her to come to his house.
He had mentioned that he just feels like he has no one to talk to and he doesn't have any friends, and that's kind of why he was reaching out to me so often.
And when she heard the news of what had happened over the weekend, she was shocked.
I've known him for 11 years, and that could have been me.
She says she's glad she followed her gut, but is heartbroken for the family who lost their daughter to this senseless crime.
I feel lucky and blessed, like someone was out looking out for me, but I also feel for her family and for her, because I just can't even imagine what she went through during those moments and what her family's going through.
Such a heartbreaking situation. Now, Daly says that he had mentioned that he was going through a divorce, which is something that she believes is the reason why he wanted to connect with someone. Now, Dave, a quick search of his criminal history shows that he really doesn't have anything in his record. But again, trying to piece together everything that's happened in the last couple of days.
This is one of those cases where it's not a mystery, right? But it's more about why did it happen and how should the system of justice deal with it? You've got someone who's homicidal and suicidal, clearly dealing with some mental issues, which will play a role and a huge part in the way this man is defended. But for the victim's family, I mean, think about what happened here. She's just going out on a Tinder date. Hours later, an atrocious crime scene, but it seems like investigators have enough to put all of this together. So the issue will be the mental state of the defendant now and what his mental state was at the time of this alleged killing. But as I said, as he gets into court, we should get much more information about the evidence and the manner and cause and everything else associated in that case. So we'll continue to track that one.
He was arrested without resistance. And then came the confession that would send shockwaves through the community. Ethan told investigators that the date had been completely normal. There had been no argument, no reason for violence. But then he revealed something even more disturbing. He told police that he had daily thoughts of suicide and homicide. He admitted he had recently been thinking of ways to kill and kidnap others. And perhaps most chilling of all, he confessed that he had invited Ashlyn over knowing what he intended to do. This wasn't a spontaneous act. It was deliberate. News of the murder spread quickly through Layton and beyond. For Ashlyn's family, the loss was incomprehensible. Her sister, Ashlyn Black, later described the moment she learned of her sister's death. It felt like the earth had opened up, and I fell into it. In the days that followed, the family released a statement calling their daughter's killer a monster. They spoke of a crime as senseless as it was evil, and of hearts broken beyond repair. But as the investigation unfolded, a more complex picture of Ethan Hunsaker began to emerge. Co-workers from a concrete and asphalt company where Ethan had worked said he hadn't always been this way. One former colleague described him as the goofy young kid that always made us laugh, always had something stupid to say. But something had changed. End of last year, it was just weird. The co-worker recalled. He went from goofy to just nobody wanted to be around him. Despite his disturbing behavior and his confession, Ethan initially pleaded not guilty. But in June 2021, he changed his plea, entering a guilty plea with a designation of mentally ill. His plea was not part of any agreement with prosecutors. Deputy Davis County Attorney Jason Nelson made it clear, "We never offered a plea deal in this case. The prosecution had refused to offer any reduced charges or sentencing recommendations. They wanted Ethan to plead guilty to murder or take the case to trial." Following his guilty plea, the court ordered mental health evaluations. A licensed clinical social worker determined that Hunsaker suffered from major depressive disorder with psychotic features, as well as generalized anxiety disorder. He had been diagnosed with mental health illnesses and was on prescriptions for those conditions. His defense attorneys argued that his mental state should be taken into consideration during sentencing. In February 2022, nearly 2 years after Ashlyn's death, Ethan Hunsaker stood before a judge for sentencing. The hearing was deeply emotional. Ashlyn's sister and other family members took the stand, speaking directly about who Ashlyn had been and the void her death had left. 2nd District Judge David Connors sentenced Ethan Hunsaker to 15 years to life in prison for murder. But there was a condition. Before beginning his prison sentence, Hunsaker would be committed to the Utah State Hospital for up to 18 months, or until his mental state stabilized. The judge found that Hunsaker posed an immediate physical danger to himself or others if placed in a correctional or probation setting. The decision wasn't made primarily for Hunsaker's benefit. It was made out of concern for other inmates and officers who might be at risk if he entered prison without treatment. Ashlyn's family expressed frustration with the court's decision. They felt the legal system had been more focused on accommodating the person who murdered their daughter than on honoring her memory or their grief. Judge Connors acknowledged their pain and apologized, explaining that his hands had been tied in many ways by legal requirements. The family's statement captured the heartbreak and anger they felt. A monster has taken away the life of our little girl in a crime as senseless as it was evil. Our hearts are broken, and our lives are forever changed due to the despicable acts of another person. In just a few senseless and selfish minutes, A life of an amazing, fun-loving young woman was taken, one who had a passion for being the voice of those who could not speak out for themselves. As news of the case spread, it sparked important conversations about safety in online dating and about victim blaming. Advocates for survivors of violence pointed out that some people on social media were placing blame on Ashlyn for agreeing to go on the date, for going back to Ethan's house. Victim advocates were quick to shut down that narrative. This wasn't Ashlyn's fault. She had done nothing wrong. The decision to commit violence that belonged solely to Ethan Hunsaker. Ashlyn's father later shared something bittersweet about his daughter. He said she had a special talent for always being late to everything. But he would have given anything, he said, to sit and wait for her again, if only it meant she would walk through the door one more time. Her obituary reminded everyone that Ashlyn was a beautiful example of love. She taught inclusion and tolerance for everyone. And perhaps that's how she should be remembered. Not as a victim of a Tinder date gone wrong, but as a young woman who lived with compassion, who fought for others, and who deserved every bit of happiness the world had to offer. If this story moved you, if you believe these cases deserve to be told with honesty and respect, please subscribe. It helps us continue this work, and it means more than you know. Thank you for listening, and for honouring Ashlyn's memory with us today.